So I was at the store the other day and saw one of those Lightbox cinematic style signs where you just have the letters you put on it to put messages. I thought that'd be a cool Photoshop project, so let's do that. New document, 2160 pixels wide by 3840 pixels tall, or whatever size you want. The resolution, 72, and RGB color 8-bit, and we'll be ready to create. Here we have this on here. I'm going to create a new layer, and this layer we can just call it wall, and using shift backspace fill in the contents with a color, and there's this light gray CF CF CF. I think that looks good. We'll click OK there. And later we'll put a gradient on it to make it look a little bit better. But for right now it's fine. Then we can make a new layer for a rectangle using our shapes over here. And the color of this rectangle, the fill for this color, we will go 191919, so almost black. And then we can always resize this later. We'll draw it out. I'm going to have these edges be sharp, so these little circles on the corners here, if you click and drag those on this new version of Photoshop, you can change the roundness of those, and I don't want it to be round, so go with that. I think that looks good, and I'll call this layer frame. Alright, then we can make another layer, and actually this layer will be, no, it'll be above frame, and we'll call this one light, just for the lighted side. It will also be a rectangle, and the fill color for this will be white, just all the way white, all F's, 6 F's if you're using your hex code values. And this one just a little bit smaller than the frame, and again I do want these to be sharp corners on here. You can always go back in and edit these shapes in your properties tab on the right hand side. And this actually looks pretty darn close. I can zoom in a little bit, Control T the frame if I need to, and while holding shift make that bottom part of the frame just a little bit smaller of a gap between there, and that should work nice for that. Okay, so that looks good. For the light of this, there are some things that we can actually do with this layer style, and actually one of them is to convert this to a smart object. So if I right click on the light in my layers panel and convert to smart object, then if I go to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur, and probably 2 to 3 I think would be okay for pixels. And because it's a smart filter on there, because it's a smart object, I can always go back and double click on that Gaussian blur and change it if I need to. It's not like if it was just a rastered layer and those changes are basically final. Here it's a smart filter and always modifiable, which is nice. So I think that looks good for that, just to give it a little bit of a soft edge around that light there. We can also then go into the layer style for this light layer, and let's find an inner glow. And if we select this inner glow, not inner shadow, my bad, inner glow, here we go. And for the blend mode, if we use normal and the opacity is 40%, and select this color here, and this is # 828282 for the hex value there. Gives us a little bit of a gray, and the technique's softer. And instead of center, what we see a lot with that inner glow, if it's on the edge, it looks like it's lighter in the middle, like the light bulbs are more centered and don't come to the ends of the sign, and just real gradual. For the size, could probably go around 120 to 125. Chokes is 0. And for the contour down here in the quality, I like this one right here. When you mouse over these, it usually shows it half round for that, and adds a little bit of realism to it, I think. We can click OK. Yeah, I do think that looks pretty good right there. So yeah, I think that's decent. Next thing that we can do is using our type tool, and the color for this type will be the same as the frame, so this 191919 color we're using. And I'm using this quote from the Netflix show Arcane, based off of the League of Legends games, modified a little bit. But the quote says, he said, "In our pursuit of great, we failed to do good." I like that quote. I thought it was awesome. So modifying it for this sign, I'm going to type in pursuit of great, and then enter. Make sure these are all the same size here. There we go. In pursuit of great, don't fail to do good. And resize this. I'm going to use the right text line for this, but you could have it be centered if you want. It's kind of up to you how you want that to be. And I think this looks good. The typeface I'm using is Bebis Noya, I believe is how you pronounce it. I think that looks good for those type of letters. That would be good for this sign. There's another one though. I believe it is called High School USA Sans, if you want more of a block style of letters, and I think that looks good too. And that particular typeface you can get from defont.com. High School USA Sans, I believe. If not, something very similar will be on there. But I'm going with this typeface here. I think that looks good. And with that, you can duplicate that layer if you want, in case you want to make any changes to it, and then just make one of those two layers invisible in case you want to make modifications later. And then right clicking over here, I can actually turn this into a shape. So I want to find convert to shape, and if I use a little bit of an outer glow on these letters. In normal, the opacity be 100%, and the color for this be the same color as the actual letters there. So that was clicking in here, and then we use 191919. We have that kind of soft blackish gray color, and then the technique is softer. The spread is 0. I think that will work fine. And for the spread, or I mean for the size, spread 0, the size, I think 5 is fine for that. And then it's just gives that like it's glowing. We have some light kind of leaking around the edge of those letters. Should work pretty nice right there. The other thing you can do for this, and this is the reason, you don't have to convert that to a shape to use the outer glow, but if it is a shape, then we can go over here to these tools and find our path selection tool and choose one of these letters. Use Control T, and if you want to just have one letter be rotated a little bit off of that, then I think that looks pretty good. A little bit of that lighted sign effect. Last few touches here, go to the frame, and we can drop a shadow underneath it. So if you use normal blending mode for it and use black for the color of the shadow, probably 30% is fine for the opacity on that. And then the distance, give it a little bit of a distance, and if you wanted it an angle, you know, it's kind of your call for that. If it looks a little bit better at an angle there, like it's got some 3D depth to it on there, and distance 30, size 20, something like that, just so you have a little bit of a soft shadow around that outside. That looks good. I'll click OK. And then finally on the wall, make sure you have the colors black and white selected over here in your color selections on the left hand side. Double click on the wall and use gradient overlay. And if you go into the gradient here, find basics, go black to checkered, and blend mode normal, style radial, and then we have to click on reverse so it's check marked, so it's lighter in the middle. And then, you know, yours will probably be centered there. And if you bring your cursor over the canvas here, you can move that gradient around a little bit. So I'm going to naturally move this up a little bit so it's a little bit centered with that sign, and bring that scale up to 150, and then we can bring down this opacity to whatever you want it to be. Just kind of depends how dramatic you want those shadows or those lighting for it. I think sometimes if it's a little more subtle, it's a little bit more effective. And then there we have it. So I'm going to click OK. There is our light. And again, when you're done with that, you can always rechange your light and the frame size. You know, if you want it to, if you think it's a little too tall. I think this looks pretty good for this effect. Might just be a fun way to post a message on to a social media image or graphic, and you want to use something more than just typing in the words. Use some kind of a lighted Lightbox cinematic marquee sign, whatever you want to call it, and hopefully that'll be something that's kind of useful. And you can save it and use it as a template for later on. Appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you on our next video.